chapter 4, verses 8 to 11, right there, leave the text up on the right-hand side. And let's just kind of walk down through the questions here. What does enslaved to God's mean and say about the recipients? So when it says, formerly you who did not know God were enslaved to beings that by nature are no gods at all. Do you know, and it's a real simple, quick answer, what does that tell me about the recipients of this letter? Don't be afraid to make mistakes there. You got to, just to keep the ball rolling, shout it out. Idol worship? Yeah, idol worship, exactly. Keep going. And so what does that tell me about the audience? Joe? That they're Gentiles, exactly, right? So I'm sure there are Jews in the audience, but when he says, you who were enslaved to gods, the idolatry is an absolute Gentile thing, not a Jewish thing. Jewish people never had trouble with idolatry after the exile. So when he says you were enslaved to those things which by nature are not gods, he's saying you guys are Gentiles, okay? Or the people that he is speaking to directly. And so when he says here, now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, get my little PowerPoint going here. Know God versus be known by God. Why the change in tense there, or the change in voice? And again, real quick answer, not a big deal. Probably your intuition is correct. But why does he change his grammar? He's trying to emphasize, just mildly emphasize something. What is it? I think, my guess is 80% of you know. So would one of those 80% please say something here? Steve? Okay. Yeah, I wasn't going to go quite that far with it. Maybe that's where he's going. But at least he's trying to say, you weren't just smart enough to know God. God got to know you, right? He's talking about the divine initiative in salvation, okay? And he could have just marked it out and written it correctly the first time, but he didn't, because why? He just kind of wanted to make the point. All right, so how is it you turn back to weak and worthless basic forces? Do you want to be enslaved to them all over again if you're observing religious days and months and seasons and years? Now, you look at that and you realize what they're turning to is the Jewish calendar and Jewish things, and yet Paul calls it the weak and worthless basic forces. So it's like, wow, does he have that bad a view of Jewishness? And in fact, if he's saying that, how can this very same Paul work really, really hard to get back to Jerusalem for Passover? Right? And I think you know the answer to it. He's talking here about the Gentiles who are going back to those things. So let me be really explicit and say this. Since for Gentiles it is impossible to embrace Christ and Judaism, right? Now get that in your head here for a second. For Gentiles, it's impossible to embrace Christ and Judaism. They are then left with a non-messianic Judaism that is no different than paganism. So for them to go back to Jewishness is by definition to say Christ isn't enough for us. Well, that's a non-messianic Jewishness. And a non-messianic Jewishness is not a saving Jewishness at all. It's just mere Judaism. It is, in fact, the kind of the worst case scenario, or the Pharisaical stuff that Luther was afraid of. Okay? So since by definition for Gentiles it's impossible to do that, they're going back to this paganism. And you can see why with statements like these, Luther saw such easy and immediate parallels to the Catholicism of his day, which was paganism. Right? Really was. And he concluded that Judaism is paganism. Now, that little statement right there, I want to say, well, he's going a little bit too far, because post-Acts 10 Gentile proselyte Judaism, after Acts 10, is by definition paganism. But then again, you're the only people on campus who understand that sentence. Okay? As long as you do, we're good. Okay? Paul's Judaism is not paganism because it has a Messiah at the core of it, right? But this, by definition, is. Besides all this, they're simply going backwards in God's developing program. Who in their right mind wants to go back to 7th grade? Anybody here want to go back to 7th grade? Wasn't 7th grade just about the worst time of your life? Yeah, just about? Okay, who wants to go back there? I don't want to go back there. And that's exactly what they're doing. So because you know that I can't really teach anything without a chart, here's a chart. Okay? It says the same thing. If you don't believe that Jesus came to bless Gentiles as Gentiles, then you don't really believe the gospel, and you're minimizing the sufficiency of Christ, which Paul can only label as another gospel. So, since we need an animation here, here's what we're going to do. If we're here, and you're in the Cornelius stage of things, and you're going to go back, you have to get to the cross and kind of throw it away, pretend it didn't happen, in order to get back over here and become a Nicholas. And you can see why this is such a bad thing to do for a Gentile. Okay? So if you don't remember, just think of it that way. Or, since I really take every chance I can get to show you my favorite chart in the world, let's say if you're up there and you decide you want to go back here, and you all know what that means, right? You were a red arrow that was close, and now you're going back becoming green. In order to do that, you have to bypass Jesus and kind of kick him out of the way. And that's again, part of the backwardness, the wrongness, and why Paul's so upset about it. So, with that then, let's get on to the next major section. All right, are we good there? Any questions about that part? You're all happy with it? I did just refresh these things on the S drive, so in case you want to see the PowerPoints, you got them, and you can see the exact wording. Okay. Personal appeal. Do we have any I don't think we have any communications majors, do we, in here? Or do we? Anybody? Okay, sometimes we do, and they recognize these things immediately. Their faces light up because they're happy because they see these familiar words to them. Pathos, ethos, and logos. Is anybody familiar with them? Do you know what they mean? You do? Oh, where'd you guys learn about this? In where? In English? Oh. Well, what do you know? What did they teach you? It was speech. I don't know. It's a freshman, right? Does anybody remember what they mean? Yeah, pathos, something that's pathetic. It has your emotions. Ethos, it has ethics or credibility to it. And logos, it has rational, clear thinking. And here's the point. This quote from a really important commentary, Betts' commentary in Galatians about Greek rhetoric. He goes back to this guy named Quintilian, who was a very famous rhetorician. And he says this, and it's a really cool quote. His advice is to diversify by 1,000 figures. Paradoxically, extremely perfected logic was thought to create suspicion and boredom, not credibility. While a carefully prepared mixture of some logic, some emotional appeal, some wisdom, some beauty, and some entertainment was thought to conform to human nature and to the ways in which human beings accept arguments as true. Does that make sense to you? Think of it this way. Who is your favorite chapel speaker? It's probably not somebody who just gets up and drones on about facts all the time. But it's not somebody who just tells stories, and it's not somebody who just cries all the time, or it's not someone who is just great but it can't speak very well. It's somebody who can combine all of those things together, who is clearly logical and rational, but is a real person, has some emotional appeal too, right? All that stuff. And that's exactly where we are here in 4:12-20. It's a very personal appeal. We haven't seen Paul do this up to this point, but as a good communicator, now he puts some really close, heart, intimate, personal appeal to it, right? So he's going to say things like this. Man, where's that love which you had when we first met? You guys were so close to me, you would have pulled out your eyes and given them to me, right? So it's just a very, very personal appeal. So it's not like what we've seen up to this point at all. It's a very different kind of thing, but that's because as a good communicator, you include all sorts of different ways to connect with your audience, and that's exactly what Paul's doing here. So he's going to say these things like this. Verse 14, though my physical condition puts you to the test, you did not despise me or reject me. Instead, you welcome me as though I were an angel of God. Now, this is where some people think that, remember, I don't know if we talked about this, but there was a point where Paul gets stoned to death probably, right, in Lystra. And my guess is that after that happened, he didn't look too good. Think what you would look like when a crowd of people throws so many rocks at you that you end up dead. Right? Some people think that might have affected him. You might have had an eye disease or something like that, which is why he says, if possible, you would have pulled out your eyes and given them to me. Right? We don't know enough to be sure about that stuff, but there was something about his appearance that was kind of repulsive, apparently. And so, again, this whole paragraph there is simply, gosh, remember what good friends we used to be? How come all of a sudden I'm your enemy? Just because I told you the truth. A couple of immediate points I want to say this. When he says, become as I am, become like me, I think what he's saying is this: comfortable at the Gentile table, for I have become as you are. I eat with Gentiles. But ironically, you don't want to now. I'm just going back to the 2:11 to 14, to the Antioch situation. And he says, verse 17, they're shutting you out. And again, just go back to what Peter was doing. This is exactly what Peter had been doing. They want to exclude you so that you would seek them eagerly, right, and get circumcised so you could join their table. However, it's good to be sought eagerly, but for a good purpose at all times, not only when I'm with you, not only when I am present with you. So he says these things like, I'm undergoing birth pains again until Christ is formed in you. He feels like he's having to get them saved all over again. And I think that's really all I want to say about that, unless you have a big question about it, which I can't answer. Okay? All right, let's keep going then and do this. Let's talk about Paul's hermeneutical break from reality. Now, we're going to get to this point where Paul says, tell me, you who want to be under the law, do you not understand the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by the slave woman and the other by the free woman. And then he says this in verse 24, these things may be treated as an allegory. Okay, you see that word? Now, let me just scoot ahead in the slide here for a second. I think what's going on is this. When he says, I'm speaking allegorically, he's saying this. I'm making this stuff up out of my head. It's a way to clue us in that he is just making this stuff up out of his head. An acute rhetorical argument designed to make an emotional counterpunch to their claims. What he's saying is, I'm not exactly exegeting this responsibly, but I'm fighting fire with fire in this rhetorical contest, okay? When he says, those of you who want to be under the law, do you listen to the law? And my guess is that he is making up this allegory which puts his opponents in a really bad light because they've probably been doing the same thing. Going back to the Old Testament, Paul says, look, they've got such silly reasoning, or they're making stuff up that's not really there. If you want to play that game, I'll play that game. Okay, here's an allegory, right? And then he does this thing about Ishmael being a son of the slave woman and the natural descent and all the way down here. But it's not something that is taught in the text of Genesis 16 or 17 or 18, okay? And the reason why I say that is because when he says allegorically speaking, that is a clue, that's a tip-off, that this is not exactly good exegesis. He's just fighting fire with fire. Again, if this were in the first part of the book, I probably wouldn't say that. But here in the last part of the book, where he's made this personal appeal, right, and we read how good communicators work, I think it probably this is exactly what's going on. Right? So let me go back to the previous slide then and review it. I think this is what's happening. Perhaps Paul was fighting fire with fire or turning their arguments against them. That's something like this. Hey, if you really want the blessings of Abraham's family, then you need to become an Isaac, circumcised, not an uncircumcised Ishmael. Right? Obviously, it's this emotionally charged rhetoric designed to persuade or divide for people to say, well, goodness, I sure don't want to be an Ishmael, right? Who wants to be an Ishmael? I want to be an Isaac. And it follows up on his declaration that Gentiles are now Isaacs, that is, true sons of Abraham in 3:29. So he goes through and he makes this allegory like this. Let me go back to the text. And he says, these things may be treated as an allegory. These women represent two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. This is Hagar. Now Hagar represents Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem. When he says corresponds to the present Jerusalem, I think he's talking about the actual Jerusalem of his day that was filled with Messiah rejectors, right? So he's saying, okay, all those Messiah rejecting people who think they're God's people because they're under the law, but they haven't accepted Messiah, they really belong in this camp. And the camp you really want to belong in is the people over here who are children of the promise coming from, Genesis 12:3. And you're part of the Jerusalem which is above. Now, again, this is where it's not that great an argument, but it might have matched the Judaizers' argument, I guess. And so he's going to say, okay, you're part of the Jerusalem above. Well, what's the Jerusalem above? Aren't we living here on earth? Well, yeah, you are, but I think what he means is you are the true Jerusalem. That is, you are God's real people, which are Jewish and Gentile Messiah acceptors. Okay? Now, you say, I don't know if that makes a lot of sense to me. I don't think it makes sense to anybody, except the people who heard the original argument. Okay? And I don't think there's really, I've searched this thing out, I've studied it, I've gone into it in great detail, and I'm telling you what, I think that's all there is there. Okay? Now, if anybody still want to ask a question or make a comment about it, feel free to go ahead. Yes? No? You good? Okay. Let me go on to something, though, that is kind of interesting. Yeah, Daniel? No, I don't. Well, it's okay to do if you have a particular point where you're just trying to fight fire with fire. That is, the Judaizers are probably, I'm just guessing here, listening on one end of the phone conversation, I'm guessing that they were coming up with these kinds of cool allegories, and Paul says, okay, here's one for you, right? And just kind of answers it that way. So I think the only reason Paul would do this, and the only place I think he ever does it in all of Scripture is here, probably because he's trying to answer what somebody else is doing in their argumentation. Yeah. Okay, then let's get down here to this quote. In 4:27, he makes this quote, "Rejoice, O barren woman who does not bear children, break forth and shout, you have no birth pains, because the children of the desolate woman are more numerous than those of the woman who has a husband." Now, this is pretty interesting because this comes from Isaiah 54, okay? And in order to get this, you have to remember the teaching of Hosea. Can somebody tell me, can somebody summarize the book of Hosea in one or two sentences? What's the big deal about Hosea? Yeah.
God used the relationship between Hosea and his wife to represent his relationship with Israel.
Yes, exactly right. And she was unfaithful to him, and then what?
He kept buying her back.
He bought her back, and
They had several children as well.
they had several children as well, that's right, but he bought her back and they got remarried. Remember that? So there was a point in their marriage where things were good, and then they went really, really bad because they got divorced, and then they got remarried. And in relationship to the nation of Israel, it is saying what? God married Israel, then there was an exile where the covenant was broken, but then what? There will someday be another marriage where he draws them back to himself and enters into a new covenant relationship with them, which will make the first one pale by comparison. Right? Remember that story? So let me just throw this out in front of you. If anybody, if you're in my class, you remember these slides maybe. Bad news, then good news. God's going to break up his relationship, but he's going to renew it again in the future. The bad news is divorce. The good news is remarriage. The bad news is the exile. The good news is the new covenant. The divorce and remarriage of Hosea and Gomer mimics the exile and new covenant through the nation. Now, what's important about that is this. In Isaiah 54. Now, let me go back and show you a little bit about Isaiah 54, okay? This is where it comes from. Actually, it comes all the way back here in Isaiah 49. When you start reading through these 4 chapters of Isaiah, it is filled with statements like this. Isaiah is written on the brink of the exile, and he is prophesying, looking forward to the time when God will end the exile and bring his people back. And so all the way through, you see things like this. God's going to restore the remnant of Israel. I will make you a light to the nations, Gentiles, right? So you can bring my deliverance to the remote regions of the earth. Surely your waste and your desolate places and your devastated land, surely now you will be too narrow for your inhabitants, and those swallowed up will be far away. So what he's saying is, I'm going to bring you back to the land, and there's going to be so many of you that you'll say, there's hardly enough space here to live. Okay? The place is too narrow for me. Then you will say in your heart, verse 21, who has borne me these? I was bereaved and barren, exiled and put away, but who has brought up these new children? Okay? And you keep going, you go all the way through here, and you get more and more discussions like that. And then you get to this beautiful part in Isaiah 52, where he says, you'll be redeemed without money. I mean, there's just so much good stuff here. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who say to Zion, your God reigns. You ever sing that? Right? It's a great modern hymn based on this. Talking about when they return to the Lord. And then here, Isaiah 52:13, what's this all about? This is Messiah coming, right? So Jesus is right here in the middle of all this. The ultimate servant, the one who will sprinkle many nations, the one who grew up before him like a tender plant, like a root out of a dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, no beauty that we should desire him. Now, this is the beautiful part. Isaiah is looking forward to this ultimate day, and then he sees Jesus, and then in the midst of this whole discussion, he says, Isaiah 54, sing, O barren one who did not bear, bring forth into singing and cry aloud, you who have not been in labor. For the children of the desolate one will be more than the children of her who is married. Now, you might look at that and think, that's so enigmatic, nobody can figure it out. But you easily can. If you just think about the Old Testament theology and everything that Isaiah has been saying here, let's go back then. Let's go back. I mean, you can keep reading this stuff here. You'll spread abroad and you will possess the nations. The reproach of your widowhood you'll remember no more, for your Maker is your husband. Let's go back. Let's go back then to this. Let's go back to this, and let's go back to this. Well, maybe I should leave one of them up. I'll leave one of them up. Okay. Now, rejoice, for more are the children of the desolate than the one who has a husband. So we've got two people here. Who is the yellow one? Who is the one who has a husband here? Yeah, it's Israel. But where is it that she actually has where is it that she's married and not divorced? It's right there, right? And so the desolate woman is where? Yeah, she's the one who is divorced and doesn't have a husband. Now, the text says, rejoice, for more are the children of the desolate woman. But of course, in the context of Isaiah, it's saying doesn't have children when she's desolate, but after she gets remarried, God is going to give her so many kids she won't know what to do with them. So this desolate woman is not blessed in her desolateness, but after the curse is gone and the bridegroom comes, right, this is going to be much better. Now, do you understand the fullness with which Paul understands Isaiah 54? How many kids do we have now? This whole time we've been talking about who are the sons of Abraham. How many sons of Abraham do we have now? Well, by golly, we got a whole bunch of Jews and a whole bunch more Gentiles. And someone could say, well, man, where'd they all come from? And Paul says this was God's plan all along, to give you so many children, Jews and Gentiles from the nations, that really what you see here is part of the beginning fulfillment of God's ultimate program of bringing the world back together after Jesus comes. And that's why I think it's so significant that Isaiah 54 comes after Isaiah 53. That part make sense? So, now we're done with the allegory. Now we're back to some responsible exegesis. Okay? All right, good? You good? You with me? All right. Okay. Then, that's all I have to tell you about that. And I want to get to chapter 5 because we have a guest speaker coming in. We have a guest speaker coming in at 125 or 127 at the latest. All right? So, back to the questions for today then. For freedom, Christ has set us free. What kind of freedom is this? You'll make my day if you can connect it with other references. Freedom in the letter. Let's not belabor it. Let's go over it fast because this isn't the most important part of the chapter we want to look at. Where else did you see freedom in the letter? 4:1-7, you saw it there. Even before that, you saw it before as well. Seth? Freedom of the curse of Jewishness. Where did you see it? There's a reference. Does anybody else have a hand up over here? No? How about 2:5? Remember that? Yeah, Marcus, what's 2:5 say? Yeah, he was talking about Titus. He's talking about Paul. He said, look, these people spied in to seek out our freedom, right? So just going with the whole letter here, I would say it's this, the freedom to love others as equals and to mix it up. Right? And so I think that's where he's going with this. That's the freedom probably we were talking about. Don't be subject again to the yoke of slavery. Paul tell you, if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no benefit to you at all. Why is Christ of no benefit? We really kind of covered this already today. How is it you get alienated from Christ? How is it you fall away from grace? Why are his words so strong? Rachel? Exactly, because you've left Christ, right? You've absolutely left Christ. Again, same thing we said before. For a Gentile to become Jewish for full acceptance is to deny the value of the coming of Christ. And you can imagine the rationale. I mean, if you were there and you were confused, can't you imagine yourself saying something like this? In an unclear situation, I'm just playing it safe and getting the big C. Also, I'm just being like Nicholas. What's wrong about that? Right? You understand the logic of this? I mean, it wasn't wrong for Nicholas, so it's okay, right? And I'm going to say, let's talk about this. So, spoiler alert, I have a very awkward illustration. It's just going to be awkward, but that's okay. You're going to remember it, and just you'll get over it, okay? But I need a couple people to work with here. We have any married people in here? Anybody married or engaged? Miguel, which are you? You're married. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. Okay, where's your wife? Okay, I guess that's true. It's not here. All right, so now I need somebody, probably some females. I'm really sorry about this. I need some females who are open to date. Come on, I need 4. Or I need some more guys who are open to date too. Single guys, raise your hands. Ryan, come on, put them up there. All right, so here's some single guys. Okay, all right, so I need a female who's totally secure and doesn't mind being part of the awkward illustration. You can do it? Casey, thanks, Casey. All right, do you mind if I just pair you up with somebody here? Okay. Ben, I think Ben raised his hand. Maybe you want me to intervene? I could like pass him a note in 7th grade in study hall if you want. Would that be okay? No, it's okay. All right, but let's just think. I mean, Randy, I think he has hand up. That's what. Maybe we could talk about Randy too. All right. Did you ever hand up? Yeah. You taken? You sure? Just checking. All right. I mean, we just go around here. Brian had his hand up, so we could talk about that too. Is that all right? All right. So now it's totally awkward. I understand that. But what if I suggested to you, Miguel? Off limits, right. So now it becomes awkward on another level, right? Especially if his wife was here, okay? Because, despite the awkwardness of it, now all of a sudden you've gotten into, well, obviously he's off limits because he's married, and here's my point. Did you date people before you got married? Yes, besides her. No, no, not while you were dating her, but before her. Did you date anybody?
I had interests. I would really consider them.
So she was the very first girl you ever dated?
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Okay. You had interests. You had girlfriends? You were in 7th grade. You didn't have any girlfriends? No crushes?
I know, I'm weird. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, typically you understand where I'm going with this, right? He could have dated before, but after he gets married, all of a sudden what was okay becomes completely different, right? Becomes completely treasonous and wrong, right? Such to the extent that we don't even feel comfortable joking about it, right? And so here's what I want to say about this point. To the person who says, look, what's wrong with that? I'm just being safe. And the point is this. What was perfectly acceptable before, Nicholas, now becomes treason because of the betrayal of the special one. Once Jesus comes into the picture, once Miguel's wife comes in the picture, what dating around, which might have been a totally fine practice before, suddenly is not even a question. So to come back here to the person who's saying, well, I'm just thinking about this as sort of insurance. It's like, no, you do that, you betray Christ. You're saying Christ is no good. This is absolutely unacceptable. And if the married person dating illustration grabs you, and it should, then take that emotional angst or outrage and apply it to this, because that's exactly what it is. And that's why Paul uses such strong language here when he says you're alienated from Christ, you're falling away from grace because you are diminishing the sacredness of this new union. All right? So again, those are the reasons for his strong language here. We good? Thanks, Casey, for being strong. Help me out. Okay. Yeah, so we've been through this whole thing before. Same thing. We're going backwards in time. So, question number 3. In Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision carries any weight. I guess I sort of answered that, didn't I? I answered the question number 3 already, didn't I? Why doesn't he say uncircumcision is everything? Well, because you still got Jewish people who are circumcised, right? He's simply saying it doesn't give you an advantage. So let's go back to our chart here and say whether you're circumcised or uncircumcised, if you're Jew or Gentile, it's no advantage. Everybody's in the same level playing field, and you're not going to get an advantage if you're Gentile. Now, let's go on to this one, number 4. Chapter 5, verses 7 to 12. Does that passage ring a bell? And I really, really hope it did. I really, really hope it did. And I don't know how many of you got it, but keep searching. Did you find it? It's what? Yeah, 1:6 to 11. Did you notice it? How many people got it? Okay. It was amazing, wasn't it? Once you started to notice it, look at this. I mean, it's just absolutely parallel. In verse 6 of chapter 1, you were deserting, now you're prevented from obeying the one who called you for the one who calls you, to a different gospel, to another view. They're disturbing you, they're confusing you, a gospel which is contrary, where you're preaching circumcision, and you're condemned to hell, or you pay the penalty of being castrated. Right? That's where he was. So you look at this whole thing. You look at this whole thing, and it is absolutely just a repeat of where he started. Now, you say, what good does that do? Well, it does this, I think. Notice the way the whole book is put together, and I didn't notice this until today. I was going through it, and remember before we did this little book ending thing, remember that, where we saw those two very similar child, slave, son thing? And we realized that really kind of bookends the whole main theological section. But then, let's just expand it out a little bit and look at this. Now, there's the whole book of Galatians. Can somebody read it for me from the beginning? This is what we had before. This was the theology book ending we saw. But now when you take this, you realize, and all the theological argument is there, that very beginning, 6 to 11, corresponds to this down here. And so in a really big way, this kind of ties up the entire book, which then leaves us just this green stuff. Now, this green stuff is absolutely different. It's like, okay, what do we do now? This is really total focus on application. It's like, okay, all the argumentation is done. We're finished with all of it. Now let's be really positive and talk about where we go from here. How are we going to live this out? And you're not going to get any more admonitions, or, well, you're going to get some admonitions, but you're not going to get any more new arguments or Old Testament stuff, arguments about circumcision. What you're going to get is, how should Gentiles live? Okay? So I think it's kind of neat. Yeah, Bill? 5, well, let's see. Let me go back here. I would say, I would probably start it right here in 5:13. The application started in 5:13, because this part here, what you see up on the screen there, 5:7 to 12, is the part that mimics 1:6 to 11. So I'd start the application part right here. For we were called to freedom, brothers and sisters, only don't use your freedom as a tool to indulge the flesh. Okay? All right. So then, let me just say this real quickly. Did you get number 5? Did you get why that accusation? If I'm still preaching circumcision, why am I being persecuted? Do you understand what the Judaizers are probably saying to the Galatians? It's very simple stuff you already know the answer to. Chloe, do you know what it was? No? Okay, I thought you were shaking your head like you didn't know what it was. It's probably just something like this. You've misunderstood Paul. He's still preaching the Gentiles need circumcision. And we went through all that in chapter 1 and 2, right? That's probably all they were saying. I guess we should do number 6 really quickly, too. What do you learn about Paul here? Why would he say this? And, of course, what we're talking about is this. What did you think about Paul having said that? It is maybe kind of a shot in the dark, but it would fit. That might be good. And that's true. What else about Paul himself? Is this the image of what you want to be? Do you want to be known as the kind of person who says these kinds of things? I mean, before you answer, think about it. Ryan? He's what? I mean, just say it. Just be unguarded here. What's wrong with him saying this? It's what?
Just strikes you as kind of crude.
It's crude. It's not very nice, right? And we all know that being a Christian means you're a nice person, right? It's just not nice. It's vulgar. Is it possible that we have maybe laid over the top of Christianity a false big idea of what it means to be the ultimately mature person? He's not nice. Why is he not nice? Because this is an important issue, right? He's going right for the jugular here because this is so important. Lori said he has righteous anger, right? He does have righteous anger because he has anger over things which are life and death situations. And if you don't get angry about sin and bad views that lead people to hell, you are not a nice person at all. If you really want to be a nice person, sometimes you say stuff like this because this is the most important thing. What would you think about someone who had an aneurysm or had a heart attack and a doctor came up and cut them open? Well, it's not a very nice thing to do. Well, no, that's the ultimate nice thing to do. That's what you want, someone to do surgery on you when you need it. Right? So yeah, Paul is. I wouldn't want to just say vulgar. Vulgar just makes it sound as though it's vulgar for vulgar's sake, but he's not doing that. He's really trying to get the attention because it's such an important issue. So I'll just say it like this: he doesn't care about being nice because the stakes are so high. And number two, eunuchs can't go to the temple; they're second class. This is what I thought was kind of a fitting, just punishment, right? Okay, you're so excited about this, go ahead and cut yourselves all the way off, and in fact, you can't go to the temple, and then you're going to be the second-class person. I don't know if he was thinking that far ahead or if he was just, trying to get the point across. Okay. Let's go on then to number 13. Is it number 7? What's the practical concern behind this defense? I hope you caught this. I'm just going to answer it for you because we're out of time here. The nagging question and concern is this. You were called to freedom, brothers and sisters, only don't use your freedom as an opportunity to indulge your flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law can be summed up in a single commandment: you must love your neighbors yourself. The nagging question was simply this. If you just let these guys, I'm talking about butches, okay, Butch. If you just let Butch go and you don't strap him with the law, then they will enjoy their freedom. Who knows where they will stop? And Paul's response, what moral guidelines will Butch have if he doesn't follow Moses? And Paul's response is this, verse 14. Loving one's neighbor is a good and sufficient summary of the law for Gentiles. Now, how in the world is this true? And then I ask you those questions about going 55. What is the connection between going 55 and love? Can somebody tell me?
The speed limit law is in place to protect people's best interests, namely their lives. So if you would be breaking that, that's assuming that you are, then you would be putting people's best interests in jeopardy, and therefore, the best way to love someone is to have the best interests in mind.
Yes, that's exactly right. So let me put it this way. If you truly, truly loved your neighbors all the time, we wouldn't have to give you any other rules. No other rules. If you always worked in the best interest of somebody else, we would never give you any other rules. You wouldn't need them. We wouldn't have to tell you not to be noisy after 11 o'clock because you'd be thinking, what if somebody else wants to go to sleep? Right? The only reason we actually have to give rules is because some people don't quite fully understand how to love their neighbor well. So let me explain it like this, okay? Do you see the connection between Deuteronomy 22:8 and love? Here's Deuteronomy 22:8. If you build a new house, you must construct a guardrail around your roof. Why? Well, because if you don't want to be culpable in the event someone should fall. You don't want someone to fall from it or hurt themselves, right? You're going to put a guardrail to protect people who do that. Now that my son and I are electrically wise, and that goes back to this, a couple years ago, we bought an old house. It was a foreclosed on house. We first thought when we got into it, we would buy it for him to live in. We'd have to do some painting and some other stuff. Well, the more we got into it, the more we had to tear that thing apart to the studs. I mean, we redid there wasn't a thing we didn't do, from the well to the plumbing to the wiring to the insulation to the drywall to the furnace. I mean, everything. And so we didn't have any electricity turned on in the house to begin with because it was so bad. And it took us 3 tries to work with the Greene County electrical commissioner to get power turned on. We were so mad at him. I just wanted to cuss all the time about because he wouldn't give us his power. But as we worked with that guy for a year, by the time we were finished, we got to the final inspection. Guess how we did on the inspection? Passed it with flying colors. You know why? Because between the beginning and the end, we learned that the electrical code is there for a reason. And that if you don't want to die, you do things according to code. You know, if you're stupid about electricity, you think, oh, what's wrong with putting this wire out here? Or using a smaller wire than is necessary. It's cheaper. And then you realize, oh, the reason why they made that law is because people died because they burned down their houses with the wrong kind of wire. And what we began to realize is well, my next illustration was, when we did our own kitchen this summer, guess what questions we asked ourselves? And the question was, what is the code? Because we're absolutely total believers in the code, because we've come to realize the Greene County Electrical Code is a very godlike attempt to promote life. Absolutely true. 100% true. Or let me put it this way, between 55 miles an hour and love, if you studied the insurance stats or police reports, and if you attended all the funerals, think about it. If you did all that stuff, what law would you pass in order to lovingly protect humans and cars? So here's my question. Can you name a law that doesn't depend on love or human flourishing? And the more you begin to think about the connections between them, you realize that you might be able to find a law that's not based on love, but 99% of them are to do that. So if you really, really do love your neighbor, you're not going to break any of the big laws if you really understand what's going on. Now, when Paul goes back here and says, look, all they need is to love their neighbors. They don't need to keep all the other laws. They just need to keep this one. That's comprehensive. That's really, really comprehensive. Now, this whole discussion is really, really fascinating. But before we leave today, I want you to listen to the guest speaker. This is going to be really, really important. I want you to take notes on this carefully. We're going to listen to the guest speaker. And we'll get to that later. Here it is, okay? We're going to learn about the fruit of the Spirit, which is, I guarantee you, cooler than you first expected. Tim, I'm just going to have you listen to 15 minutes of a Tim Keller sermon. I want you to take really, really good notes, but I'm going to drop you into the middle of it, so I'm going to give you the context first, okay? Here's the context. Keller makes 4 observations about how the Spirit changes us. All are good, but the 4th will probably blow your categories about the topic. I'm not going to give you the first 3. I'm just going to give you the 4th one. Let me make you listen to it. So take careful notes. Be ready to write a short paragraph about your personal response to point number 4 in an email to me by Thursday at 8 a.m. You got that? I want a paragraph from you about your response to what you're going to hear from Keller. And I want it to be thoughtful, because trust me, I wouldn't give up 15 minutes of my class time if it didn't blow my categories. So these are the first 3 things he says, just so you know the context. He says when the Spirit comes into your life, there will be gradual change. It takes time, but there's no instant change. Then he says it's inevitable. It must and will happen if you're a child of God. Then he's going to say it's organic and internal. That is, it's internal change and a real change in your character. Right? So that just drop you down into the first 3 points. And here's the 4th one. He's going to say it is symmetrical. And this is what we're going to listen to. It will all be there, or it's counterfeit, from 15 minutes, 30 seconds, all the way to 31:20. We may not listen to all that, but that's where we're going to be. And one of the first points he's going to make is this, that the subject, fruit, is singular, but the predicate nominative, love, joy, and peace, is very, very plural. Okay? Concatenated, all these go together. Now, I will leave that up there, or I will come back to it. I think I can do this. No, I can't.
It's got to be internal. It's fruit. It's organic growth. So fruit of the Spirit means it's gradual, it's inevitable, it's organic, internal. Lastly, we're told here Christian change is symmetrical. Now this is a bit of a mind blower, so stay with me. For centuries, commentators have noticed that Paul does something very strange here, and he says the fruit, singular word, karpos, the fruit of the Spirit is, and then he gives you a list. So the subject is singular, right? And the predicate is plural. And so, your English teacher says, Paul? No. Paul did this on purpose. Why? And the answer is, Paul is trying to show something incredibly important about real Christian change, and that is, all of these things are one. Years ago, Jonathan Edwards wrote a book, and in that book, he made one of his chapters this thesis. He says, where is it? he says there is a concatenation of the graces of Christianity. Now, in modern editions, the editors never put down concatenation. They just put down, they figure, that must be an archaic word. It's not. It's just a big word. And they say, Jonathan Edwards says there's a connection between the graces of Christianity. No. If you read the thing, you'll see. This is what he says about the graces of Christianity. He says, if you want to know whether the character growth that's happening in your life, if you want to know whether the love that's growing in your life is real spiritual love from the Spirit, from the gospel, if you want to know it's real love, real joy, real peace, real patience, and not a counterfeit, not something artificial, not something temporary, not something patched up, therefore it's fragile and it will go away under certain circumstances, or it's just natural and it's part of your psychology or your temperament. If you want to know whether these things are spiritual and from the Spirit, you must see that they always are absolutely concatenated. Well, somebody says, what is concatenated? You have to break it down. He says three things. First of all, this means, that all the graces of Christianity go together. All the graces of Christianity go together. For example, here's peace, and here is humility. If you are a very proud person, but you seem to be at peace, what is peace? It's a lack of worry, a lack of anxiety. If you're a very proud person, but you're at peace all the time, it's a counterfeit peace. Because real peace always goes with humility. They always go together. Well, you say, how could that be? Well, let me break it down here for you. The peace that's spiritual is a peace that comes from humility. You see, you know how to deal with worry? Worry is arrogance. Worry is always, in the Bible, a refusal to assume a humble posture before God. In James chapter 4, my favorite place almost on this, James chapter 4, verse 13 and 14, it says, listen, you who say, tomorrow we will go here and there, and tomorrow we will do such and such, but you don't know, and that's it. Anybody who worries thinks they know. Anybody who's filled with anxiety, it's arrogance, because you're sure you know how things have to go. You're sure you know what you need. You're sure you know how history has to go. And the peace that is always there, is a peace based on humility, saying before God, God, you know what I need. You know what has to happen. I don't know. That's the reason I don't worry, because I don't know. I'm not sure. I put myself in your hands. I'm a child. You're my father. Real peace that will never pass away, the peace that passes all understanding, the peace that's perfect, is always connected to humility. But if you're a proud person and you have peace, it's not real peace. It's peace based on the fact things are going well for you. And when you're a proud person and things are going well for you, you're actually misusing that peace, because what you're saying is the reason things are going well is I chose well. I'm saving. I got a good job. I got into a good school. I married a good person. In other words, your peace is a counterfeit peace. It is not a lasting peace. It will eventually fall apart. And this is, in 1 John 4, verse 20, it says, he who says, I love God, but hates his brother is a liar. It does not say, he who says, I love God, but hates his brother is unbalanced. It says he's a liar. That means if you don't have all the graces, you don't have any of the graces. Real peace is always connected to humility, and I could go on about that. You see, in other words, everything goes together. Some of you, for example, let me give you another example of this. Some of you are very gentle, but you're not faithful. You know what faithfulness is? Loyalty and courage. Courage. Some people are just temperamentally sweethearts. We know who you are. You know who you are. Everybody loves you. If you weren't a Christian, you'd be a sweetheart. It's your chemistry. It's your physiology. It's your Myers-Briggsness. You're sweet, okay? But you're a coward. See, natural sweetness, natural gentleness does not go with loyalty and faithfulness and courage, and it very often doesn't go with integrity either. You're so filled with love, you don't want to hurt anybody, which is completely selfish. It's a lack of love. See, real gentleness has to go with love, and it has to go with faithfulness. It has to. If you're a coward and you're gentle, you're not really gentle. You see, if you have peace but you're proud, you don't really have peace. Why? Because it's the fruit of the Spirit, not the fruits of the Spirit. So Edwards says, first of all, what this means is that there is a connection. They all come together. But he goes further than that. He goes a little further than that. He goes a little further, and he says, secondly, they're interdependent. It's not just that they always come connected. They're very, very interdependent. So let me give you a quick example. A lot of people think they have self-control. But you can't have real self-control. What really creates self-control is joy. See, the reason you get addicted to things is because you don't have any joy. Or I'll give you another thing. Very often, there's a counterfeit kind of self-control that comes not from humility and joy, but from pride. Can I tell you something that's been now listen, women, this shouldn't be surprising to you, especially since a lot of you do it to us. But I'll tell you how most of us little boys get such control. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The average guy doesn't cry as much as the average woman. Isn't that true? No. And I'll tell you how we got that kind of self-control. Because when we cried as little boys, somebody came along and said, "Don't act like a girl." Now, that gets you self-control. But how does it work? By making you feel superior to girls. That's self-control without humility. That's self-control with arrogance. You can always get self-control through arrogance, but it won't last. And it'll be a rigid kind of self-control because sometimes you need to cry and we can't. I tell you, there's a concatenation of the graces. They all come together. Peace and joy promote integrity. What is integrity? Faith. See, you know where it says goodness there? The word goodness is really sincerity. Peace and joy, integrity. Why? What is integrity? Integrity is a person who is the same every place you go. You're the same. Sincerity is a person who's not one way with one crowd, another way with another crowd. Not one way on Monday, another way on Sunday. Not one way in public, another way in private. Do you see that? A person of integrity is someone who's always the same, not manipulative. Well, where does that come from? It has to come from utter joy and tremendous peace. All these things, I mean, I'm almost done here, so I don't have, my time's up, but just think about this. Some of you are great at meeting new people. You seem very joyous and bubbly, but you can't keep your friends because you're not faithful and patient. And what that means is you don't have real joy. Real joy that doesn't go along with the faithfulness and the patience is just extroversion. It's not real joy. Some of us are extremely accepting. People will come to you and talk to you about their problems because you are so accepting. You are so non-judgmental. But the reason you're non-judgmental, see, you're gentle. But the reason you're gentle is because you have no self-control in your own life. You're always falling down. You're always lapsing. You're always breaking your own promises, and you're always breaking promises to others, and that's the reason why you're so tolerant and accepting. You've got no discipline of your own. That's why you're so open. In other words, your tolerance and your acceptance is not coming from humility and peace and joy. It's just a way of dealing with your own conscience. Some people are incredibly unflappable. They seem to have peace, but they're not gentle and they're not kind. Why? Where do they get their peace from? They don't care. They don't care. And that's not real peace. These things will all break down. Or here's another one. Some people are very naive, and other people incredibly cynical. And you know what that is? That's a lack of symmetry. Because both of those are a lack of humility. When you meet a person who's always getting taken and always saying, how did that happen? Why would anybody do that? They're just, there's no cynicism at all. Well, how could that have happened to me? Here's a person without humility. You don't know about how sinful human beings are. But when you reach somebody who's incredibly cynical, and there's plenty of those folks in New York. In fact, they all write op-ed pieces for the New York Times, from what I can tell. Incredibly cynical. Everybody's out to get you. Everybody's out to rook you. Everybody's out to do this and that. That is just as much a lack of humility. If you are that cynical, it means you think everybody else, but me, of course. It's incredibly self-righteous to be naive. It's incredibly self-righteous to be cynical. The gentleness and the self-control and the peace and the kindness and the courage, they all always go together. Look at yourself. Now, you know what? Time's up. We have to do the Lord's Supper. And I didn't get to all the rest of the stuff. Actually, if you were here last week, I gave you some ideas about how all this develops. It develops because look at here. I can just go over it again. It says, how do you?
So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take that. I want you to think about it deeply. And sometimes classes have done a good job of this. Sometimes they have not. I do not want Sunday school answers. I don't want abstract answers. I want you to deal with what he had to say. I want you to look at your own life, and I want you to, if you want to listen to this thing again, it's out on the S drive. You can see it. It's called How to Change. From 15 minutes to 26 minutes, you want to listen to it again. But I want you to think about it seriously and think about the fruit of the Spirit and what that means to you and conclusions you come to.